if you use a content optimization tool like Classcope or software, for example, you get those keywords in naturally in the other parts of the article without having those irrelevant headers there. And they still rank because Google is looking for those semantic keywords. They're not necessarily looking for them in the headers.
What does it really mean to be a thought leader in B2B? That's what we're here to find out. This is the Notorious Thought Leader, a podcast for B2B marketers who want to generate demand by creating content that builds credibility and thought leadership. In each episode, Erin Balsa helps demystify thought leadership and uncovers how companies are using thought leadership to generate demand. Let's get started.
My guest today is Lily Ugbaja, self-employed writer turned fractional content manager who's worked with brands like Zapier, Hotjar, and HubSpot. Thanks for being here, Lily.
Thank you for having me, Erin. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm excited we've had the opportunity to chat. So I brought Lily on the show today specifically to talk about her Lima framework for content creation. In my opinion, leveraging repeatable frameworks is one of the best ways to build a predictable, revenue-generating content engine. So far, I have shared my own content sweet spot framework, and I'm really excited to have Lily on to share another framework as another way of approaching content creation. So first, Lily, to clarify, would content marketers use your framework to build a content strategy or to create a single piece of content?
So the strategy is for creating content. It's for creating memorable content at scale.
Okay, cool. Can you walk me through the framework? What does it mean? What does each of the letters mean?
So it's spelled Lima, Lema, and that stands for logical, explicit, memorable, and actionable. And these are all 4 elements that content needs to have to inspire action, to help the reader get results, and, just remember your brand.
Okay, logical, explicit, memorable, and actionable. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Let's start with logical. Could you tell me a bit about what you mean by logical and how listeners can ensure that their content is logical?
Sure. So before I talk about logic, I wanted to share the concept of an audience knowledge level,
Okay.
right? So when an audience, when you write a piece of content for a specific audience, there are things that they already know, the things that they want to know why they're searching for that specific thing or why they're reading that specific article, right? And then there are things that they do not know that they should actually know at that point. And these are actually 3 questions that I paste, that I have writers paste at the top of every doc that they create. This is where logic comes in. A piece of content on content writing or content marketing, for example, for say targeted to a director of content versus a content writer is going to have different things, right? So logic is what restricts your scope so that you're only writing what your specific audience wants to know and in the order that they need to know those things. It's actually the what, the why, the who, the where, the how, with a general understanding of where your audience is at the moment, like where they are in their journey right now, what they know, what they want to know. For example, say we're writing a piece of content about maybe content marketing strategy to a director of marketing. They already know what a content marketing strategy is. They probably want to learn about a specific kind of marketing strategy that has worked for you in your organization, right?
Case studies and things like that.
Well, exactly. So the logic there is probably follow this content marketing strategy. We explain what the content marketing strategy is. We explain why we followed it, like what the problem was before, what the gaps that we saw that made us adapt this content marketing strategy and the results that we've gotten from it. Whereas if I was creating that same piece of content for an audience who is more beginner level and they're searching for, say, content marketing strategy, it will be a totally different structure, article structure. A more common example would be talking about, say, tomatoes. Now, the topic of tomatoes, I can talk about whether they are fruits or vegetable, what color they are, the history, the origin. Like, there's so much to say about tomato. But someone who is, say, asking the nutritional values of tomato, they don't want to know the
Right.
history. They don't want to know the origin. They just want to know what the nutritional value is, what would affect the nutritional value. And this is like a question that they didn't know they had,
Mm-hmm.
right? They want to know if frying is going to decrease the nutritional value. And they didn't know they had this
Right.
question. So that's basically what logic is.
Okay.
Logic is answering the questions that your audience has in the manner and the structure that they would be asking it. It's much like, I think that a perfect way to think of it is if you were having a conversation with someone, your ideal audience, if you were seated together and you talked to them about what you were writing, what questions would they have? In what order would those questions come in? That is how you lay down the logic and the structure of your article, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. We've talked in the past prior to the show about the topic of specificity, and we were talking about the fact that thought leadership can exist at any knowledge level. And that's really what you're talking about here with the logic piece. So, like you said, basic entry level content. You could, if I'm talking to an audience of content marketers with between maybe 1 and 3 years experience, my content sweet spot framework. It's not earth shattering. It's not groundbreaking, but it's a
Yeah,
new way to solve a familiar problem. So it could be viewed
exactly.
as thought leadership for that specific audience, right? And you had also mentioned, I know you used to work at Animals, the content marketing agency, and you had mentioned that the Animals blog specifically writes about advanced content marketing topics. And that's an intentional thing, right?
Exactly. Hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly. Like a new writer could never relate to the articles on animals. It's written for a specific audience knowledge
right.
level. And that's what special.
So, what's irritating? I'd love to just get your take on this. When you're trying to write, I'm sure a lot of listeners can relate to this because it irritates me. It must irritate others. When you're trying to write a page and hopefully you want it to rank organically for a specific keyword, and you use an SEO tool, whether that's SEMrush or Ahrefs or whatever, and a lot of those tools, they have, if you pay extra, you can get an outline kind of given to you. And it's like, here are, you
Yeah.
could use these for your subheadings, and here are some questions that you want to answer, right? So let's just use that tomato example to illustrate my point because it's really clear. So here I am, and
Yeah.
I'm, an audience, and I want to understand the nutritional value of tomatoes. So that's my search query. Now, on the other side of the computer, you have your content writer who is trying to write this article. And they're like, oh, my audience wants to know the nutritional value of tomatoes. So I'm going to find an appropriate keyword. I'm going to use my SEO tool. And it's telling me that within this article, I should be talking about what is a tomato. So this is like the big puzzle for content marketers. Like, what do I do? Do I trust my instinct? Do
Yeah.
I know that my audience doesn't give a shit about what is tomato because they know that? And do I focus on their level? This person is at an, intermediate level. They're not at a beginner. They don't need to know what is tomato at the expense of then possibly my article is not going to rank because the search tool is telling me I have to talk about what is tomato. What's your thoughts on that? Is that something that you've struggled with too?
I struggled with this a lot in the beginning, where more clients that they really have the point of view that I have now, where I was having to work with more clients like that. I feel like companies should play the long
Yeah,
game, especially now that AI and everything is happening. Search is changing, right? People are going to do more brand searches, and if you just pattern the pages just so that you come up on the SERPs, people are going to remember them. I click to your page and I get inundated with stuff that isn't relevant to me, I click back. And next time I see your brand name on the search, I'm not clicking because you didn't satisfy my search intent the last time,
Right.
right? And you don't actually have to sacrifice SEO for this. Right now, you can put all this stuff in the first, in the FAQs where it doesn't affect the user's experience, right? Focus on the user first,
Right.
optimize for search second.
And just so people are clear who are listening, when you say put it in the FAQs, are you talking about a separate FAQ page, kind of like a glossary, or are you talking about a section at the bottom of the article where you're putting those frequently asked questions?
Yeah, I'm talking about at the bottom of the article. And there's something else in with content optimization tools like ClearScope, for example. You don't really have to worry as much about having all those subheadings that break the flow of the content. I've seen articles rank really fast and stay there. Like they rank and they stay there. When you fulfill all the search requirements, putting all those irrelevant headers and stuff, it ranks, but it eventually comes down. But I've seen articles rank and stay there when they follow the right thing, which is focusing on the user first.
Yeah, I love that.
So if you use a content optimization tool like ClassScope or software, for example, you get those keywords in naturally in the other parts of the article without having those irrelevant headers there. And they still rank because Google is looking for those semantic keywords. They're not necessarily looking for them in the headers. Where those headers come to play is in the featured snippets. People also ask sections, site links, which if you put them in the facts, it doesn't matter. Google will still pick it up from there.
So, takeaway for the listeners, do not feel like you need to start your second section or your second subhead with what is tomato if you're talking about nutritional values of tomatoes. If you feel like you really
Yeah.
want to get that keyword in, put it at the bottom of the article, create an FAQ section. Something that I've done to get it in is to tell people like, hey, we're going to get right to the point. If you want extra information, check out the bottom of the page and they can go down there if they want. If not, they're going to get everything they want to know in the top part of the article. So that's another user-friendly solution. So always optimizing it for the user is always the best way. Speaking again about the logic and the specificity and really tailoring your content to your audience, whether that's beginner, intermediate, or advanced. I know you know Devin. She was a CEO at Animals for a while. I had her on the show a few months ago, and she let me know about a company called SassWorks. I asked her, what company, in your opinion, does a great job with thought leadership? And ever since I saw this example, it's really great because they don't try to be everything to everyone. They really focus on their audience, which is an advanced audience of CFOs. So if you look at their resources section, which they call perspectives, which is a term that would appeal to a CFO or a C-level leader, it's crystal clear who their audience is. So they have one bucket of content, which is their market research on the CFO experience. They have another bucket, which is CFO interviews. They're actually out in the field talking to CFOs to talk about their challenges and their solutions. And then they have a third bucket, which is founder perspectives. It's really their own internal thought leadership. It's our response to what CFOs are experiencing. And I think that's really brilliant and a nice example. And it really goes to show that I think a lot of companies do try to be everything to everyone. They think we have to write what is content marketing, what is tomato, because we have to capture that high volume organic traffic. We have to do it because our competitors are going after that keyword. So it must be the right thing to do. And I don't know about you, Lily, but I am of the mindset that yes, you can find inspiration in what others are doing, and you should. But at the same time, when you're just copying what everyone else is doing, it's going to be really hard to stand out. When others go after beginner search terms, maybe you need to go in the other direction. Maybe you need to do the thought leadership. Maybe you need to be true to your audience. And if your audience is at an advanced level, maybe you just do something different. When others zig, you zag, which kind of like is the foundation of my own personal content marketing mantra, which is like bold content creates demand. And bold doesn't necessarily mean the words you use or your branding.
Yeah.
It can mean just having the courage to do things differently. So do you have a content
Exactly.
marketing mantra? It took me a long time to kind of pinpoint mine. So if you don't have it like off the top of your head, that's fine.
Now, I actually, it ties into what you just said now. It's not an official mantra, but I feel like brands should focus on their own data more than they're looking out, like look inwards
Yeah.
more than you're looking outwards. It's if I'm creating content, for example, and I'm building strategy, and I feel like, and I've seen this happen actually. I feel like this person is my competitor because we're building the same tool. Most times it turns out that they are actually not my competitor in the eyes of my audience because my audience is searching for something that is, they call a different thing than what I call myself. The best customers that I have are searching for me using a different name than I think that they would have. And most times you can't discover this data unless you're looking internally. Like if you're going there and just mining your competitor's keywords,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what the use cases are. Like,
Right.
if that makes sense.
It's funny that you say that because I totally agree, right? So look inwards, look at your own data, look at what's most successful. And that is obviously the logical thing to do, but it's extremely hard to do for most companies because they don't have their attribution set up in a way
Agreed.
that enables that. Like I'm sure you've seen it working with companies. Of course, the big companies do. The Zapiers, the Hotjars, the HubSpots, they have the resources. They've been around the block. They have attribution set up. I don't want to say the right way, but the way that we all wish attribution was set up. But if you work with the smaller startups like I do, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that's solvable. Just before I talked to you, I had Stefan on, who's the co-founder of Dream Data. That's a software you can use that pulls together all the different activities and actually lets you see not only which content campaigns are driving pipeline and revenue, but which individual content pieces. And not just after someone fills out the form to, subscribe to the newsletter or to request a demo. It actually shows you every single page someone visited as part of their journey. So you can really identify which pages are critical in driving the right types of buyers, which is amazing. And it's something that people should do and
That
should
is
invest in.
amazing.
I know, right? It's like every content marketer's dream. Anyway, Lily, we're going off the rails a bit, so I'm going to bring us back to the Lima framework. We covered L, which is logical, all about really truly understanding the depth at which you need to cover your different topics. Love it. Makes perfect sense to me. Let's move on to the E, which is explicit, right? So is it explicit or explicitness?
I think it depends on how you use it, like in the context.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the question. When you look at, with the level that AI is at right now, like when you look at a piece of content that's written by AI, what's the easiest thing for you to pick out?
It's usually very surface level. It's kind of like on LinkedIn when you see people spouting the same old generic marketing tips, like, use a compelling hook, lead with value, use a CTA. It's like, well, no shit. Like, tell me something I don't know. Tell me something that is actually actionable. Show me how to do this thing. Show me that you actually know how to do this thing. Tell me how you did it. Tell me what challenges you personally overcame with the solution. So for me, that's the biggest giveaway, that it could have been written either by someone who doesn't actually know the subject matter or by an AI writing tool. What about you?
Exactly. It's exactly the same thing. And this is where explicitness comes in. This is where explicitness differentiates your content. Like you said, write a compelling hook, for example. What exactly is a compelling hook? I don't know what that means. It could mean something different for you than it does for me. I want to be able, as your reader, I want to be able to understand exactly what you mean when you say a compelling hook. Is it a hook that induces curiosity? Is it a hook that, what exactly do you mean? I want to see an example too, right? This is what it means to be explicit. You're saying exactly what you mean, and I'm not making up stories in my head, trying to compensate for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like to use the example of fiction versus nonfiction, right? So some of my favorite fiction books are the ones that leave the ending open-ended. but they're not trying to sell to me. They're trying to entertain me. They're trying to make my mind work. You're trying to sell to someone. You don't want to make them work. You don't want to distract them.
Right.
You want to spoon feed them and get them to where you want them to be. And so explicitness is laying it all on the table. And this is, I don't know if you can tell how excited
I
I
love
am.
it.
This is, this is what reveals most times how much the person who is writing the article actually knows about the
Mhm.
topic. This is the reason why people can just click off of an article, because you're not giving examples that, you have to work the talk to be
Yep.
explicit. You can't make it up.
And I would, point out that this explicit step really does, it's grounded in the logical step, which is why I'm glad that the L comes first, because the word hook, take that for example. If I am brand new, it's my first day as a content writer, and I see a post that's like the hook, I'm like, what do you mean, Captain Hook? Like a
Uh-huh.
fishing hook? What kind of hook do you even mean? So if you're writing this article
Exactly.
or this ebook for a beginner, you need to actually let them know what you mean by hook. If you're writing it for, an advanced person who's been working in the content marketing space for a decade, you don't need to tell them what a hook is. If you do, it's going to make them roll their eyes and they're just going to be irritated, right? Like, what is tomato? So
Yeah.
that's also really an important
Yeah.
point to help people get across, because it's something a lot of early content writers, they just don't, you don't know what you don't know. I've been there. I'm sure you have. Like the day one, everything you're writing, you're like, oh, you're assuming people know when they don't know, or sometimes you're giving them details that they don't need. And it can take some experience
Exactly.
to kind of suss out when and when not to give or omit certain details. I also had a little personal story where you were just talking about don't make them work. So I started working with a new client, amazing company, really revolutionary technology, but they're really early. They're an early stage company. And so I mean, it's like a lot of low hanging fruit, a lot of really easy ways to make some pretty important improvements. So for example, on their free trial sign up flow, they're an enterprise ready solution and they do work with enterprise companies, but they also, as many companies do, have a hybrid GTM motion. They also have a free product that you can go sign up yourself without talking to sales. You can use the product for a X period of time. And the form, it takes a lot. So there's, first of all, a ton of fields. There's a lot of different improvements that I suggested. But one thing that stuck out to me that the average person or a new marketer might not realize is the concept of the paradox of choice. So for any listeners who aren't
Hmm.
familiar with this, it's essentially that the more choices you give someone, the harder it is for them to make a decision they feel good about. And the more likely it is that they're later going to go back and regret their decision. So, for example, if I sign on to a new product and here I am, I'm landing on the product on day one. And in the product, you're like, cool, thank you for signing up for this product. Here we have a quick start guide. And here we have a, visual quick start guide. And here we have detailed, documentation. And here's our knowledge base. And here you can contact customer support. And here you can take the self-guided course. It's the paradox of choice. You're going to stress people out. So that really applies not only to writing an article, but also to thinking through all different things that marketers are tasked with thinking about. So that is something that is really, really important. I just wanted to kind of double click on that point that you made because it's a good one.
Sure.
Moving on. Memorable. That is the M in the Lima framework. What do you mean by memorable?
Oh, memorability is a lot of things, but I would describe it like how it leaves your audience when they leave uh, your blog or your piece of content or whatever. How do they feel? Do they share it with people? Do they remember it? Do they bookmark it? How do they feel? Do they feel connected to it? This is what makes what makes people remember your brand. This is the reason why brands will come up in search and they're number 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then the reader scrolls past all the other content and clicks on them because I can remember this brand. They were so exceptional the last time that I read their piece of content. And how do you achieve that? Your framework is like one example of memorability. I feel like the pinnacle of memorability is always a coined concept. Coined concepts are so easy to remember. The Lima framework, for example, it's going wild right now and it's nothing special, right?
Yeah. Not
If
earth shattering, not
you,
revolutionary, but very useful, very practical and useful, which is why it's going wild right now because people want things that are useful.
yeah, but I mean, I feel like people have shared, I don't know, but probably someone out there has shared something, maybe not put it all together, but putting it all together and then coining a name for it that just you think Lima and then you remember logic and explicitness and memorability and actionable. It's just so easy to remember. It's just so easy to ask your right there. How have you gone through your article with the Lima framework and they are like, oh, I know what that
Right.
means, right? Coin concepts like that, coin concepts like the skyscraper technique, and this is in
Yeah.
marketing, right? All these things make content memorable, even for decades. The AIDA technique for writing, the problem agitate
Yeah.
solve formula, all those things. But I admit that not everyone can coin a
Mm-hmm.
concept. And so the fallback is usually relatability. This is how you make people remember.
Yeah. And that's where the empathy piece comes
You
in, right? Relatability through empathy. I've been there. I feel your pain. I've walked a mile in your shoes. And I'm the guide
exactly.
who's now going to help and empower you to solve your problems, right?
Exactly. And you know what's good? You mentioned this before about how explicitness builds upon logic, is that memorability also builds upon explicitness and logic. So memorability involves showing the screenshots about what the steps you're describing look like in the app. So that I go into the app, I want to do the thing that you said, and I can remember what that feels like. Like I feel like I've walked through this journey because I've watched you do it. Memorability is describing with examples that will show me what the concept looks like in real life. For example, the tomato example that we used in the beginning, right? Memorability is analogies that make me easily relate the concept that you're trying to talk about to what I already know.
Yeah. It's an important skill for writers. I don't know, maybe like 7 or so years ago, I took an online course from ACES. It's like, actually, the course was called ACES, the Advanced Certificate in Editing, something or other. I can't forget. It was a while ago, but if anyone's interested, it's focused really on how to talk about big figures, complex data in a way that's memorable. And I remember one teaching that really sticks out to me all these years later. And it was like, what do you do if you need to report on a figure that's really big and people can't wrap their heads around it? One thing you can do is to compare it to something people know. So, for example, if this is a sports article and I need to give you some sort of big number, I could say, that is equal to 4 football fields. And if I'm a sports fan, I know exactly how big a field is, and I can now visualize what you're talking about in a concrete, memorable way. That's another good way or good teaching that people can take away from this episode.
Yeah, I use that often and it's a game
It
changer.
is. I love it. Another thing that I learned from a former colleague of mine who was an educator and an instructional designer, we sat down one time to write this kind of workbook, a guide, which each section had learning objectives. And we started by sitting and asking ourselves, in this section of this workbook, what do we want the reader to know, feel, and do? And I think really the feel and do come into the memorability piece because it's all about that emotion. It's all about, that memorability. What do we want them to feel?
Yeah,
And things that are
yeah,
memorable, they give you that aha moment. I think about the content that I bookmark. I have a bookmark and it's called Gold Star Content I Love. And whenever I come across a content piece that gives me that aha moment or makes me smile, I'm like, this is Gold Star content I love. And I bookmark it. That's memorable. Or the things that I save certain posts on LinkedIn. Like, what is it about those posts that make them memorable? Well, they maybe tell me something new. That's the no piece. They make me feel something and they inspire me to take action, even if the action today is only bookmarking or saving. maybe I'm not requesting a demo, but they're getting me to take action. And I think that's another nice way to think through things.
Yeah, it's funny that you use the bookmark example because and the article that I wrote introducing the Lima framework to the world, that was the exact example that I used. I was like, look at your bookmarks right now. What do the articles that you bookmark have in common?
Yeah,
So it's really cool to hear you say this.
cool. So the last bit is actionable. So obviously bookmarking is actionable, but let's talk more about what it means to be truly actionable with your content marketing.
Actionability. If I come to your piece of content looking to do something, and obviously I'm looking to do something because I'm not just reading for the sake of reading. How well do you enable me? Do you inspire me to do that thing? Because I always say this is that action is what makes people go out there, get results, and results is what makes them remember you. Like if you teach me something and I take that and I implement it and I get results from it, I come back to you and I want to do more. I had a physiotherapist recently, my daughter's physiotherapist. I introduced him to Google My Business and he set up his profile. He set up his profile. Lots of people would not set up their profile, but he set up his profile and he started getting clients from there. And he came back. He remembered, he came back. He wanted to do more. And that could have been like an opportunity to upsell my services,
Hmm.
right? And that is the aim of actionable content, inspiring readers, equipping them with everything that they needed to fulfill that action. Like when I talk about the example with my daughter's physiotherapist, for example, I didn't say go find Google My Business or go set up your Google My Business profile. I said go to, I gave him the URL of Google My Business. And then I showed him what that step would look like exactly what to do
Yep.
in the order to do it. I think Pep Ledger has a very good example of what this should look like on the CXL blog. It's called, I don't know why, I can't remember. I think it's how to cook or something like that.
How to cook?
Yeah. He used it as an example where I say, okay, for example, I say how to cook rice, right? The should how fallacy. That's what the article is
The
called.
should have fallacy.
So
Okay.
should how.
Oh, should
So
have.
it's like I'm telling you what to do, what you should do instead of how to do it.
Yes.
Right. So an example would be say you want to learn how to cook rice, right? And I'm like, take your rice and put it on fire and wait till it's done and eat it. I've told you how to cook rice, but if you've never cooked rice before, you don't know what to do. You don't know what uh, temperature the water should be at when you put in the
Yep.
rice. You don't know how many measures of rice you would need to make one serving or two servings or three servings. You don't know how to time the rice to make sure that it's done at the time that you need it. Like those are things that I need to say if I want you to if I want to enable you to take action. Otherwise, you'd probably just forget it and order takeout.
Yeah. I love that. That's another really memorable example, just like tomatoes. And now people can remember the rice. That's really helpful to have those concrete visuals. So if people want to go back, look at this framework more, do you have anywhere where you have this framework where people can read more about it? And could you share where they could do that?
Yeah, I have this on marketingsidebook.com. I have, I'm actually working on a couple of templates and cheat sheets that they can use to build out the content engine at scale using the Lima framework. And then at How the Fuck has a detailed breakdown of Lim, the Lima framework as well, including some checklists. Those are two places where people can find.
Awesome. And I will ask my podcast agency Motion to add some of those links to the show notes to be helpful. Last question before I let you go on with your beautiful day. If you could leave our listeners with any tip or a bit of advice, whether that be personal or professional, what would that be?
I would say I touched on this a little bit before where I talked about looking inwards rather than outwards. And I would say frameworks are good, templates are not. Like you can adapt someone's framework based on your own personal data. But I don't feel like it's right to take someone's templates and use exactly like because a template was made for a specific situation, whereas a framework can be adapted to your situation. So always customer led data rather than competitor led, if that makes sense. Like focus on you, your customers, what you're seeing in your CRM, what you're seeing in your data analytics tools instead of competitor research.
Love it. And I would add that templates should be viewed as a starting point. They should be viewed as something that you are free to customize. You're not locked in to use the template exactly as it exists. For example, in my research report course, I include my project management template, and it kind of has everything in the kitchen sink because it is geared toward in house marketing teams who need to think through every step of distribution and promotion. So it's going to have every possible step on there. It's going to say, did you add a banner to your homepage? Did you change your company wide email signature? But if you don't have an email signature tool that enables you to do that, just take that step away. It's not like you're locked into doing all these things. It's just to be a starting point. And I think people should think about all templates in that way. Just wanted to add that on to your excellent tip that you shared. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this framework is really smart and actionable. And the way that you described it was really memorable. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing your framework.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my greatest honor.
Well, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Notorious Thought Leader. If you're looking for more stories from marketers who are generating demand from thought leadership, then visit us at motionagency.io/notorious. See you next time.